properties of a parallelogram. So we've talked about the polygon and how polygon just means many angles. We're going to mainly focus on 4 angles, or a quadrilateral, within this unit, and the first one we're going to talk about is a parallelogram. So a parallelogram, just like its name, it's a quadrilateral, meaning it has 4 sides. It's a 4-sided shape with both pairs of its opposite sides parallel. Okay. So a parallelogram, all their sides are parallel. The properties of a parallelogram, we can see that if a quadrilateral is a parallelogram, so a 4-sided shape is a specific type, it is a parallelogram, then all of these properties are true. Its opposite sides are congruent, so BC is congruent to AD, BA to CD. Okay. Its opposite angles are congruent, meaning B will be congruent to D, and A here will be congruent to C. Okay. Consecutive angles are supplementary. That means the angles that are next to each other are going to add up to 180. Right? So looking at A and D, those should add to 180 degrees. Same thing for B and A, C and D, and B, C. So any angles that are next to each other have to add up to 180 on the corners of the parallelograms. And also, finally, the diagonals will bisect each other. So we've talked about diagonals last video. Here we're talking about the diagonals going across each other. Okay? So each of these diagonals will bisect each other, meaning they will each be split into equal parts. Okay? So you can see which ones are congruent to each other. This side or segment will be congruent to this segment. BE will be congruent to ED. Okay, so these are all the properties of a parallelogram. Let's say we are given minimal amount of information and we want to prove that a quadrilateral will be a parallelogram. Well, we have 4 ways to do it. They are very similar to the properties because we are looking at the properties to make sure that the properties of a parallelogram are present. But then these are the 4 ways to prove that a 4-sided shape is a parallelogram. The first way, we want to show that both pairs of opposite sides are congruent. So if I can show that BC is congruent to AD, AB, and CD, that is enough information to know that it's a parallelogram. I don't need to know that all the angles are congruent, all the diagonals are bisecting. All I need to know is that both pairs of opposite sides are congruent. Okay. Number 2, second way, both pairs of opposite angles are congruent. So instead of looking at the sides, if I'm given that the angles are congruent, the ones that are across from each other or opposite of each other are congruent, then that is enough to prove that it's a parallelogram. Third way, I want to show that one pair, so not both pairs, but one pair of opposite sides is both parallel and congruent. So one pair, only one pair of sides have to be labeled. So let's say I want AD and BC to be labeled. If I label this pair of opposite side to be both parallel and congruent, that's enough to prove that this shape is a parallelogram. I don't need to know anything about the other side. As long as I know that one pair of opposite sides are both parallel and congruent. Finally, the fourth way is by using the diagonals. if I can show that the diagonals are bisecting each other, meaning they split each other in half, then that's enough to prove that this is a parallelogram. Okay, so BE is congruent to ED, also AE is congruent to EC. So just knowing that the diagonals are being bisected is enough to show that this four-sided shape is a parallelogram. In class, we're going to go over these ways to solve some problems. So right now, before class, I want you to be able to understand or familiarize yourself with each of these four ways and the properties of a parallelogram.